The most dangerous person in the chapel that afternoon was not the elegant woman holding a pair of silver scissors in her hand. It was the bride who stood still and let her use them. By the time the first guests began whispering beneath the stained-glass windows of the Whitmore Estate Chapel, by the time the string quartet slipped into another polished melody and the wedding coordinator checked her watch for the fourth time in 60 seconds, Serena Caldwell had already made the most important decision of her life. Not the decision to marry Daniel Whitmore. That one had been easy, clear, quiet, certain. She had made that decision months ago, the way people make choices they do not need to explain to themselves. No, the decision that mattered now was this. She was not going to stop Daniel's mother. She was going to let Eleanor Whitmore show everyone exactly who she was. Outside, the Connecticut afternoon looked like something pulled from an old money dream. The estate spread across rolling acres of manicured lawns, white stone walkways, and rose gardens so carefully cultivated they seemed almost rehearsed. The chapel itself stood in the center, like a promise carved out of ivory and money, wrapped in climbing roses and framed by tall, arched windows that caught the light in a way that made even the most cynical guest pause for a second. Every pew had been decorated in white and sage. Every candle had been placed with intention. 300 guests had traveled in from New York, Boston, D.C., Chicago, and beyond. Executives, investors, women whose last names lived on museum wings, men who sat on boards that quietly moved cities in directions ordinary people would never fully understand. It was the kind of wedding that made people stand straighter just by entering the room. And upstairs, in the bridal suite, Serena stood in front of a mirror while the woman who had spent 14 months trying to belittle her finally stopped using words and picked up steel. Serena was 27 years old, warm brown skin glowing beneath soft bridal makeup, natural curls shaped into a beautiful crown that framed her face like something deliberate and powerful. She had spent the last few months growing her hair with care, wearing it exactly as she wanted on the day she married the man she loved. She looked calm. That was the first thing people always noticed about Serena. Calm. Not because life had been easy on her, not because she had never been underestimated, but because somewhere very early she had learned that stillness unsettled the wrong kind of person more than anger ever could. Eleanor Whitmore was the wrong kind of person. She stood behind Serena in a champagne Chanel suit, silver hair pinned into a perfect twist, pearls resting at her throat like inherited authority. She was in her early 60s and still striking in that severe, sharpened way some women become when beauty is fed for too many years on status and control. Her smile always arrived a beat after her eyes, as if even warmth had to pass inspection before entering the room. "You look lovely," Eleanor had said when she first walked in. Then, after a pause long enough to make it sting, "Better than I expected." That was Eleanor's style. Compliments that arrived carrying knives. Observations polished until they looked harmless. Questions asked with such refinement that it took a second to realize they were insults in evening gloves. Serena knew them all by heart now. And real quick, before we go any further, if you enjoy stories where the quietest person in the room turns out to be the one with all the power, take a second to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let's get back to Serena, because this is exactly where everything starts to crack. The bridal suite smelled faintly of roses, hairspray, and expensive powder. On the vanity sat champagne flutes, lipstick tubes, pearl hairpins, and a styling kit that someone should have packed away 10 minutes earlier. Priya, Serena's maid of honor and college roommate, had stepped out to check on the flower girls. The bridesmaids were already downstairs. The wedding coordinator had come and gone. Yet Eleanor remained, moving slowly around the room, straightening items that did not need straightening, touching things that did not belong to her, lingering in a silence that felt rehearsed. Serena watched her in the mirror. "You know," Eleanor said at last, her tone going soft in the way it always did right before she said something cruel. "I have always believed a marriage joins more than two people. It joins families, histories, standards." Serena met her own eyes in the mirror. "I agree." Eleanor's gaze drifted upward toward Serena's curls. The look on her face shifted. Not disgust exactly, not even contempt. It was something colder than either. Calculation. She tilted her head as though she were examining a centerpiece that had been slightly misarranged. "Your hair is very abundant," she said. "Beautiful texture, of course, but it overwhelms the veil." I mentioned as much to the stylist, but she seemed determined to make a statement. "I like my hair," Serena said. Eleanor smiled. "I'm sure you do." The room went quiet again. What Eleanor had never understood, what she had refused to understand from the very first evening Daniel brought Serena to the family townhouse on the Upper East Side, was that Serena did not need permission to belong anywhere. Eleanor had mistaken grace for uncertainty, simplicity for lack, softness for weakness. It was an error many people made once. Most never made it twice. Daniel, on the other hand, had understood Serena almost immediately. They had met in the least romantic way imaginable, which, to Daniel, made it feel all the more real. Serena had been working a residential cleaning assignment through a hospitality staffing agency. Daniel had hired the service for his Tribeca apartment while preparing it to go on the market. He came home early one afternoon and found her standing in front of his bookshelves, reorganizing them by subject instead of color and size. He had asked, half amused, "Why are you changing the shelves?" Without looking up, Serena had said, "Because this way you'll actually be able to find what you want." He laughed. She did not. Then he asked if she wanted coffee. She said yes. He canceled a dinner reservation 3 hours later without even noticing when the time passed. It had started like that. No performance, no setup, no strategic chemistry. Just two people in a room recognizing something honest in each other. Eleanor hated that story. To her, origin mattered more than character. A woman met in a townhouse at a charity gala could be respectable. A woman met while cleaning an apartment could only ever be suspect. It did not matter how intelligent Serena was, or how composed, or how easily Daniel relaxed around her in ways his own family had not seen since he was a teenager. Eleanor had already written the conclusion. She had decided Serena was temporary, opportunistic, decorative, a flaw in the line of succession. She ran a background check within days. It came back clean and sparse. No criminal record, no debt problems, no scandals, no substantial assets, no obvious social connections. A modest savings account, strong references, employment records from the staffing agency. Eleanor looked at the report and felt vindicated. To her, the absence of visible power was the same thing as powerlessness. What she never found was the name Serena had once carried and later chose to leave behind. Serena Caldwell Brooks. At 22, Serena had legally removed Brooks from her name. Not because she was ashamed of it, but because she wanted to know exactly who she was without it. Her father, Gerald Brooks, was the founder of Brooks Integrated Solutions, one of the largest privately held facilities management and commercial cleaning companies in the Northeast. Corporate contracts, commercial towers, hospitals, universities, high-security buildings that trusted his teams with keys, systems, schedules, and the invisible labor that made powerful people comfortable. Gerald's company serviced more than 400 clients across the region, including, for the past year and a half, the entire commercial property portfolio of the Whitmore Group. Eleanor Whitmore had been signing off on payments to Serena's father's company for 18 months. She simply had no idea her future daughter-in-law was his daughter. That, Serena believed, told her everything she needed to know about how Eleanor saw the world. She saw service, but not the people who provided it. She saw status, but not substance. She saw a woman in plain clothes and decided that was the whole story. And now, with the chapel filling and the minutes slipping towards ceremony time, Eleanor stood behind Serena, studying her reflection as if she had finally run out of polished ways to express her disapproval. "There are scissors in the styling kit," Eleanor said lightly. Serena turned her head just slightly. "Why?" "Just a tiny refinement, along the side perhaps. Your face can carry a cleaner line than this. I used to cut Daniel's hair myself when he was a boy. I have a steady hand." For the first time, Serena turned fully away from the mirror and looked straight at her. "You want to cut my hair?" she said. "On my wedding day?" Eleanor gave a soft laugh. "You say that as if I suggested something outrageous. A quick trim would improve the entire silhouette." "No." There it was. Simple, clear, final. But women like Eleanor often heard boundaries as challenges. Her smile did not move. "Serena, you don't always know what works best in rooms like this." The sentence hung there between them, more revealing than she intended. Rooms like this. Families like this. Men like Daniel. Lives like these. Serena could have called for Priya right then. She could have stepped back. She could have raised her voice. She could have turned the entire moment into a scene. Instead, she said nothing. Eleanor took that silence for surrender. She crossed to the styling station, lifted the scissors with the confidence of a woman so accustomed to power that consent had begun to feel optional, and stepped back toward Serena. "2 minutes," she said. "You'll thank me later." Serena held her gaze. Later, when people would ask why she stayed still, she would tell the truth. Because she had spent 14 months watching Eleanor hide behind etiquette. 14 months being measured, categorized, and quietly insulted by a woman who believed good manners were a perfect disguise for malice. Serena had known the mask would eventually slip. She had only been waiting for a moment large enough to matter. So she stood there. Eleanor lifted the scissors and cut. Not a cautious trim, not a careful shaping. 4 sharp inches from the right side of Serena's halo of curls. Enough to destroy balance. Enough to make the style impossible to correct in the next few minutes. Enough to tell the truth in a language no one could politely misinterpret. The severed curl fell to the floor between them. For one strange second, the room seemed to go completely silent. Then the door opened. Priya stepped inside, saw the scissors, the hair on the floor, Eleanor's composed face, Serena's expression, and froze. "What happened?" she asked. But the question came out in a whisper, because everyone in the room already knew. Serena touched the shortened side of her hair. Her hand did not shake. Eleanor lowered the scissors and studied her own work, with the calm satisfaction of a woman convinced she had re-established order. "There," she said. "That's much better." Priya stared at her as if language had left the building. Serena looked at Eleanor one last time in the mirror, not with hurt, not with panic, not even with rage, with patience. "Thank you," Serena said quietly, "for showing me exactly who you are before I became your daughter-in-law." Eleanor gave a dismissive little smile. "Don't be dramatic. I need you to leave this room now." Priya had already pulled out her phone. "Security," she said into it, voice suddenly steel. "I need someone up here immediately." Eleanor laughed then, lightly, beautifully, stupidly. The laugh of a woman who had never paid a real price for anything she had done. She was still laughing when Serena turned back to the mirror and decided she would walk downstairs exactly as she was. 8 minutes later, the chapel doors opened. Every guest stood, and Serena Caldwell began walking toward the altar with one side of her hair visibly shorter than the other. She had removed the pearl pins from the damaged side and let the rest fall as it wanted. She had done nothing to hide the sabotage, nothing to soften it, nothing to help anyone pretend this was normal. In a room built on aesthetics, she chose truth. That choice changed the entire temperature of the ceremony. Daniel was waiting at the altar in a dark, tailored suit, one hand tightening around the other the moment he saw her. At first, he looked confused. Then he looked closer. He saw the asymmetry. He saw the altered shape of her hair. He saw the unmistakable steadiness in her eyes. And because Daniel Whitmore was not stupid, he understood immediately that whatever had happened, it had not happened by accident. When Serena reached him, he leaned in just enough to whisper, "You're beautiful." A faint, knowing smile touched her mouth. "I know." Then, after a beat, "We need to talk after the ceremony." His jaw tightened almost invisibly. "Okay." The officiant began. The vows were spoken. The rings were exchanged. They were pronounced husband and wife under white roses and late afternoon light. Guests cried. Cameras flashed. String music rose and softened. Eleanor Whitmore sat in the front row smiling in photographs as if nothing upstairs had occurred, as if she had not just cut the bride's hair with her own hand. But in the third row, at Serena's request, sat a tall, silver-templed man with calm eyes and a posture that suggested he had no interest in proving anything to anyone. Gerald Brooks watched the ceremony without blinking much. He did not interrupt. He did not react outwardly. He did not turn to stare at Eleanor or whisper to the person beside him. But people who had spent time around men like Gerald knew what stillness sometimes meant. It did not always mean peace. Sometimes it meant decisions. At the end of the ceremony, he stood, applauded his daughter, kissed her cheek, and said only, "You handled that exactly right." Serena held his gaze for a second. "I know." That was all either of them needed. The reception unfolded in the grand ballroom of the estate, and at first glance it looked flawless. 12-foot floral installations softened the high ceilings. Candlelight drifted across crystal and polished silver. The menu had been designed by a chef whose name people mentioned with the kind of reverence once reserved for composers. A jazz ensemble played near the terrace doors. Servers moved quietly with trays of champagne and small, perfect courses that looked too elegant to disturb. Eleanor moved through the room like a woman reclaiming territory. She accepted compliments about the flowers as if she had personally invented roses. She adjusted place cards with graceful fingers. She directed the photographer without seeming to. She smiled at donors, investors, board members, and old family friends. If anyone noticed the altered shape of Serena's hair, no one said it aloud. In rooms like this, scandal did not disappear. It merely changed outfits. What Eleanor did not do was pay proper attention to the man seated at table 3. Gerald Brooks had been introduced during cocktail hour. Eleanor shook his hand and dismissed him within 40 seconds. He looked to her like what she assumed he was. Respectable, polite, self-made perhaps, but not structurally important to her world. He did not announce his wealth. He did not perform influence. He spoke with the ease of a man who did not need people to understand his reach in order to have it. It was the third major mistake Eleanor made that day. The first was walking into the bridal suite alone. The second was picking up the scissors. The third was deciding Gerald Brooks was not worth a second look. Daniel found Serena on the terrace just after the first course. Twilight had settled over the grounds in pale blue layers, and the estate lights glowed in the gardens below. Serena stood with one hand on the stone balustrade, the cool air lifting the uneven edge of her hair. He came to stand beside her. "Tell me everything." He was trying to stay calm, but Daniel's calm had always been structural, not effortless. It was built from years of growing up inside a family where real emotions were sanded down into acceptable shapes before being shown in public. He was good at reading pressure, good at surviving atmosphere, but he was not good at pretending not to feel. Serena turned to him. She looked tired for the first time all day, but not broken. Never broken. "She cut it on purpose," Serena said. His face hardened instantly. "I know." "She asked first. I said no. Then she did it anyway." Daniel looked away, jaw flexing. "If I walk back in there right now, I'm going to say something I won't take back." "You probably should," Serena said. "Just not yet." He looked at her again. "What does that mean?" So Serena told him everything. Not just what happened upstairs. Everything. She told him why she had taken cleaning jobs in the first place. Not because she needed to, but because after college she wanted a year in which no one could open a door for her using her father's name. She wanted to know what remained when status was removed from the equation. She wanted work that was real, physical, unglamorous, and impossible to fake. She wanted to see who respected labor and who only respected the people who never had to do it. She told him she had dropped Brooks from her name at 22. Told him her father had not fought her on it because he understood exactly what she was trying to build. Told him Brooks Integrated Solutions held the facilities contract for Whitmore Group commercial properties. Told him his mother had been approving those payments for 18 months without connecting a single dot. Told him Gerald had already arranged a call with his contracts attorney for Monday morning. Daniel listened without interrupting. The jazz ensemble inside started a slower song. Glass clinked somewhere behind the closed terrace doors. The estate seemed to hold its breath. When Serena finished, Daniel said the one thing he could not stop seeing. "She cut your hair." It was not a question. It was the image his mind kept returning to. Not the business implications, not the hidden name, not the contract. His mother, standing over Serena with scissors on their wedding day. "She did," Serena said, "completely on purpose." He nodded once, very slowly. "What do you need from me?" That question settled something deep and quiet inside her. He did not say, "I'll fix it." He did not say, "I'm sure she didn't mean it that way." He did not rush to translate cruelty into misunderstanding. He asked what she needed. "I need you to trust me," Serena said. "I do. I need you not to get in front of this." His expression tightened again. "That's going to be difficult." "I know." He exhaled. "Okay." Then he took her hand and said, "But after tonight, I'm done pretending I don't see her clearly." Serena gave him a small nod. "Good." If you're still here, this is the moment to hit subscribe, because the story is only getting better from here. A lot of people can survive humiliation. Very few can stay calm long enough to turn it into leverage. Serena was about to do exactly that. They re-entered the ballroom together. The speeches were about to begin. The best man spoke first, charming, polished, appropriately brief. He told a college story about Daniel getting locked out of a ski cabin in Vermont and laughing so hard at his own mistake that everyone else forgot to be annoyed. The room warmed. People laughed. Glasses lifted. Priya spoke second. Priya understood audiences. She knew how to walk them right up to the edge of truth without pushing them over too early. She spoke about Serena's loyalty, her discipline, the strange comfort of being in a room with someone who never needed attention to know her own value. She told a story from college about Serena working 2 jobs, tutoring a friend through exams, and still showing up at 2 a.m. with cold medicine and groceries when Priya had the flu. The room loved her by the end of it. Then Priya looked directly at Serena and said, "You have always known exactly what you are worth. Today, the rest of the room gets a chance to catch up." Some guests thought that was poetic. A few understood it was a warning. Eleanor spoke third. She rose from the head table in pearls and composure, adjusted the microphone, smiled at Daniel, and began a toast so polished it practically reflected light. She praised family legacy. She praised Daniel's discipline, education, and business instincts. She spoke of continuity, foundation, and heritage. She described the marriage as a joining of strengths. Twice she referred to Serena as the woman Daniel has chosen, never once using her actual name. When she finished, the applause was polite and practiced. Then Gerald Brooks stood up. He had not been included in the printed program. Eleanor had seen to that. There was no official father of the bride toast listed, no slot reserved, no microphone prepared in his honor. But men like Gerald did not wait for invitations from people who had already insulted their daughters in public and private. He rose slowly, lifted his glass, and waited. The room quieted in stages, table by table, conversation by conversation. People who did not know him sensed immediately that they should. Even the servers seemed to move more softly. "I'll be brief," Gerald said. His voice was low, steady, almost conversational, not performative, not theatrical, which somehow made everyone lean in more. "My daughter asked me to let tonight remain elegant," he continued, "so I will." A light ripple of curiosity moved through the room. "I have spent 40 years building businesses, reviewing leadership, negotiating contracts, and making judgments about character under pressure. And I can say without exaggeration that I have rarely met anyone who carries herself with more grace, self-control, and dignity than Serena." He turned toward her, and for a moment the room disappeared. He was just a father looking at his child. "That is not sentiment," he said. "That is professional assessment." There was a small laugh at that, warm, surprised. Then he looked out over the room and added, almost casually, "Some of you may know me tonight as Serena's father. Others may know my name from a different context entirely." That was when Eleanor stopped smiling. "My name is Gerald Brooks." The change in the room was subtle but immediate. Heads lifted. A few eyes narrowed in recognition. Two men at the back exchanged a quick glance. Someone near the dance floor stopped mid-sip. "Brooks Integrated Solutions," Gerald said pleasantly. "My company has held the facilities management contract for Whitmore Group commercial properties for the last 18 months. This time, the silence was different. Not social silence. Corporate silence. The kind that arrives when information enters a room carrying price tags. Gerald lifted his glass toward Serena. "I raise it to my daughter, who chose to build herself before she ever asked the world to recognize what she came from. Serena, you never needed my shadow. You never needed anyone's." Then he sat down. The applause that followed was real, but uneven. Some people clapped because the speech was moving, others because it was startling. A handful because they suddenly understood exactly how dangerous Eleanor's arrogance had been all along. At the head table, Eleanor lowered her champagne flute very carefully. Her expression remained composed. Her eyes did not. After the speeches, the room split into small currents of speculation. People smiled too brightly. Conversations sharpened. Old money families prided themselves on never appearing rattled, but that did not mean they failed to notice when the bride's father casually revealed he held a multi-million-dollar contract with the groom's company and had just delivered that revelation like a velvet-covered blade. By the time dessert was served, half the ballroom had sensed that something larger than wedding drama had occurred. By the next morning, 3 board members and 2 vendors had heard different versions of the same story. By Tuesday, Eleanor had the contract termination notice in her hands. It arrived on heavy legal stationery, clean and unembellished, citing a vendor discretion clause and strategic review authority. 60 days. No breach allegations. No emotional language. No theatrics. Just a precise, airtight withdrawal from a business relationship that no longer reflected mutual trust. The Whitmore Group account represented roughly $4 million annually to Brooks Integrated Solutions. It was a major account. But Gerald Brooks had not built his company by confusing revenue with dignity. Some money cost too much to keep. Eleanor read the notice twice in her office on the 42nd floor of the Whitmore Group headquarters. Then she called Daniel. He did not answer. She called again. Still nothing. She phoned the family attorney, who read the document and told her, with professional regret, that it was legally sound. She requested Gerald's direct number from her assistant. 15 minutes later, the assistant returned and said, "Mr. Brooks is unavailable. His office asked that all future communication regarding this matter go through counsel." For the first time in many years, Eleanor Whitmore sat alone in her office and felt the edges of power shifting underneath her. The business press noticed before society pages did. A small item ran in a trade section the next day. Dense, understated, the kind of reporting designed less for public consumption and more for people who spoke fluent implication. Brooks Integrated Solutions initiates strategic portfolio review following concerns around leadership alignment. To the average reader, it meant nothing. To vendors, investors, and executives, it was smoke. By Wednesday afternoon, 2 additional vendors requested early review meetings with the Whitmore Group. One delayed renewal. Another flagged concerns about pricing structures authorized under Eleanor's office. What had once been protected by her proximity to the family name suddenly seemed worth examining more closely. That was how real damage worked in circles like theirs. Not in dramatic explosions, in audits, in calls not returned, in careful language that signaled changing weather, in people deciding, quietly and all at once, that the safest place to stand was not beside you anymore. Eleanor requested a meeting with Serena. Serena declined. Eleanor sent another request through Daniel. Serena declined again. Then came flowers, a handwritten note, a private lunch invitation, an appeal through Daniel's aunt, a suggestion from a family friend that clearing the air would be best for everyone. Serena ignored them all. Because peace, as she had learned, was not the same thing as access. And forgiveness was not the same thing as invitation. Some people confuse closure with the right to re-enter your life after they have shown you their character. Serena did not make that mistake. The truth was, she had not been pretending to be poor. She had been refusing to use wealth as scaffolding. There was a difference, and it was everything. She had wanted to know who she was without the Brooks name smoothing roads in front of her. She had cleaned apartments because she wanted to understand labor from the inside, not admire it from across a boardroom table. She had wanted a life built on direct experience. She wanted to know whether a man would still see her if she brought no visible advantage into the room. Daniel had. He loved her before he knew her father's name, before he understood the scale of her family's business, before he realized that the woman his mother looked down on had entered his life carrying far more discipline than most of the people Eleanor spent decades trying to impress. That mattered to Serena more than any contract ever could. 3 months after the wedding, the Whitmore Group announced an internal restructuring. The official language was smooth. Strategic modernization, governance realignment, enhanced oversight. The kind of phrasing designed to make a fracture sound like a refresh. In reality, the termination of the Brooks contract had triggered a wider review of vendor approvals and discretionary authorizations. Once certain people started looking, they found what usually gets found when entitlement has operated too long without challenge. Irregularities no one had examined because the right name sat above them. Several long-term advisory allies of Eleanor quietly stepped aside. A few contracts bearing her personal authorization received immediate scrutiny. Rate anomalies surfaced. Relationship patterns emerged. Nothing explosive enough for handcuffs, plenty corrosive enough for influence. Eleanor kept her title for a while. Then she kept only part of it. Then eventually she kept the office, but lost the room. Power rarely leaves all at once. It drains. It recedes. It stops arriving early and starts leaving quietly through side doors. Daniel's role within the company changed as the audit progressed. He had not been deeply operational before. That began to shift. People who had once seen him primarily as Eleanor's son started realizing he might be something else. Competent, measured, and more independent than they had assumed. Especially once it became clear he had not intervened to shield his mother from the consequences of what she had done. That, more than anything, unsettled her. Daniel had spent a lifetime adjusting himself to survive Eleanor's version of love, which always came laced with obligation and image control. But marriage, for him, became a line. Once his mother crossed it with Serena, something in him settled permanently on the other side. He still answered some calls in the first few weeks, then fewer, then almost none. When he did speak to Eleanor, he did not shout, he did not accuse, he did not bargain. He simply refused to distort reality for her comfort. "You assaulted my wife on our wedding day," he said during one call. Eleanor inhaled sharply. "That is a grotesque way to phrase a minor incident." "No," Daniel replied. "It's the accurate way." She tried tears once, tried outrage twice, tried maternal injury, social embarrassment, strategic concern, and finally, silence. Daniel had known all of her methods his whole life. For the first time, he was not responding to any of them. And if you've made it this far, go ahead and like the video and subscribe, because what happens next is the part people never forget. Humiliation is one thing. Watching someone lose access to the world they thought belonged to them? That's something else entirely. By spring, Eleanor Whitmore had been transitioned into a ceremonial advisory role, with no voting authority, and a generous exit package she was in no position to refuse. The meeting lasted 22 minutes. The board called it respectful. Private sources called it overdue. Daniel was not in the room when it happened. He was at a partnership meeting with Brooks Integrated Solutions, because the contract Brooks had terminated was not gone forever. It had been restructured. Expanded, actually. Gerald Brooks, who knew exactly the difference between revenge and leverage, had allowed Whitmore Group the opportunity to rebuild the relationship under stricter operational standards and new oversight. But one term mattered more than any other. Serena would negotiate directly. At first, some executives treated that as symbolic, a gesture toward reconciliation, perhaps. They learned quickly it was nothing of the sort. Serena came into those meetings prepared to the decimal point. She understood staffing models, site performance, retention patterns, escalation failures, scheduling inefficiencies, and the hidden waste that accumulated when privileged people never truly respected service operations. She had lived the work from the floor up and understood the contracts from the top down. That combination made her nearly impossible to outmaneuver. She did not posture. She did not show off. She did not once mention the wedding. She simply ran the meeting. People left those rooms with two realizations. First, Serena Caldwell had never needed rescuing. Second, Eleanor had not merely insulted the wrong woman. She had misjudged a person built to outlast her. Throughout all of this, Eleanor continued trying to reach Serena. A handwritten note on family stationery. No response. A request for a private lunch. No response. A message passed through Daniel's aunt suggesting that time had softened things enough for a woman-to-woman conversation. Still no response. Serena read the first note once, folded it neatly, and filed it away without comment. She was not dramatic about her boundaries. She simply enforced them. That was part of what made them so effective. On a rainy Thursday in September, Priya visited Serena at the new apartment she and Daniel had taken in the city, a place bright with books, plants, and the kind of deliberate warmth that comes from people building a home rather than displaying one. They sat at the kitchen counter with takeout containers and glasses of wine while late summer rain tapped against the windows. Priya studied Serena's face for a minute and said, "Do you ever think about meeting with her? Just once?" Serena considered it honestly. "No," she said. "Not even for your own closure?" Serena smiled a little. "People always say closure like it's a gift someone else can hand you. It isn't. It's a decision." Priya leaned back. "You know what the wildest part of all this is? There are several contenders. You never even looked surprised. Not upstairs, not at the reception, not when Gerald stood up. It was like you'd already seen all of it." Serena glanced toward the rain-dimmed window. "I had. Not the exact details, but the shape of it." She turned back. "People reveal themselves in patterns long before they reveal themselves in events." Priya laughed softly. "You really are terrifying." "No," Serena said. "I'm observant." The truth was that Serena had spent most of her life in rooms where people underestimated the value of what they did not immediately understand. She had watched wealthy people dismiss workers right in front of them. She had watched educated people mistake polish for wisdom. She had watched men with corner offices defer to women like Eleanor because fear and admiration often wore the same tailoring. She had learned early that people told on themselves constantly, through tone, through assumptions, through the kind of disrespect they considered too small to matter. Eleanor's cruelty had not shocked Serena. It had only finally become public. Late that fall, Daniel came home from work to find Serena at the kitchen island with her laptop open, tea cooling beside her, and her hair fully grown back into the same soft, precise halo she had worn on the morning of their wedding. The sight of it still affected him in ways he never fully explained. Not because he cared about the hairstyle itself, but because seeing it whole again reminded him of what had been taken and what had not. "What did the site visit look like?" he asked, setting down his bag. "Good," Serena said. "The new contract begins next month. We're adding 3 supervisors instead of 2. Daniel poured himself water and leaned against the counter. She called again. Serena looked up. "You don't have to tell me every time." "I know." He paused. "I just want you to know I see it." She studied him for a second. "What do you mean?" "I mean what she did." His voice was quiet now. "I've always seen it, even before this. I just didn't always name it." Serena held his gaze. That was one of the reasons she loved him. Not because he was perfect, not because he had instantly defied his mother in every way she might have wished, but because once truth became undeniable, he did not run from it. "I know," she said.
Then she closed her laptop, wrapped both hands around her mug, and let the silence between them settle into something warm. Outside, the trees had started turning. Leaves dropped one by one in the courtyard below, slow and deliberate, letting go of what had already had its season. But the story did not end there. Stories like this rarely do. Because public humiliation may create the turning point, but private life is where the meaning gets decided. The first holiday season after the wedding came with all the predictable tension of a family system trying to rearrange itself without admitting it had broken. Daniel declined the usual Whitmore Christmas gathering at the family estate. He and Serena spent the week with Gerald instead, at his home upstate, where dinner was loud, warm, unpretentious, and mercifully free of performance. Gerald grilled when he did not need to. Serena's cousins argued over card games. Someone burned the rolls, and nobody cared. Daniel relaxed into the kind of evening that looked ordinary from the outside, but felt revolutionary to a man raised on choreographed affection. At one point, Gerald stepped out onto the back porch with Daniel, both of them holding glasses they had barely touched. Snow had started falling in a slow, clean drift over the dark yard. "I owe you an apology," Daniel said at last. Gerald looked at him. "For what?" "For not seeing enough sooner." Gerald was quiet for a moment. "You saw what mattered when it counted." Daniel let out a breath. "That still doesn't feel like enough." "No," Gerald said. "It probably won't for a while." Then he turned toward the snow. "But guilt is only useful if it changes your posture." Daniel absorbed that in silence. Gerald finally looked back at him and added, "My daughter doesn't need you to rescue her. She never did. What she needs is what you gave her on that terrace. Trust." Gerald nodded once. "Exactly." Inside, Serena laughed at something one of her cousins shouted from the kitchen. Daniel heard it through the door and realized, not for the first time, that peace could sound a lot simpler than the life he came from. By contrast, Eleanor's winter passed inside smaller and smaller rooms.
not literally smaller. Her apartment remained expansive. Her social calendar did not vanish overnight. She still had friends, still had invitations, still had enough wealth to keep luxury from ever becoming hypothetical. But influence and intimacy are different currencies, and she had started losing both. Some people kept her close out of habit, some out of lingering fear. Some because high society loves a fallen queen as long as the fall remains tasteful. Yet the center had shifted. She could feel it. Phone calls returned more slowly. Advice sought less often. Her opinions, once received as directional, now landed as historical. She tried once to explain the wedding incident to an old friend over lunch. "It was nothing," Eleanor said, stirring coffee she did not drink. "A misunderstanding worsened by theatrical people." Her friend, who had known her for 30 years and perhaps understood her better than anyone else ever had, looked up and asked, "Did you cut the bride's hair?" Eleanor's mouth tightened. "That phrasing is absurd." "Did you?" A long pause. "Yes, but—" The friend set down her cup. "Then I'm afraid the phrasing is the least of your problems." It was one of the few honest conversations Eleanor had all year, and she left furious, not because she had been misjudged, but because she had finally been judged accurately. Meanwhile, Serena's name began appearing more often in internal conversations at Brooks Integrated Solutions. At first, she had only stepped in to handle the Whitmore renegotiation. Then she took on a broader consulting role. Then formal operations oversight for a new division focused on workforce retention and client accountability. Gerald never handed her authority because she was his daughter. If anything, he made it harder for her than he did for anyone else. But by then, no one needed convincing. Serena understood both the labor and the executive table. That combination was rare, valuable, difficult to imitate. At one leadership retreat, a regional manager asked Serena how she handled difficult clients without escalating conflict. She answered, "By knowing the difference between emotion and consequence." The room went quiet. She continued, "A lot of people think strength means reacting fast. Most of the time, it means making sure the other person fully understands what they chose." Nobody in the room asked what experience had taught her that. By the second year of marriage, Serena and Daniel had settled into the kind of life that, from the outside, looked deceptively calm. Work, dinners with friends, Sundays that began late and ended with grocery lists and music. They were not flashy about happiness, but they had it. Built carefully, defended quietly. And every so often, usually at night, usually in those vulnerable little windows before sleep, Daniel would still say, "I can't believe she did that." He always meant the same thing, not just the haircut, the certainty, the entitlement, the assumption that Serena would absorb it and remain in place. Each time, Serena answered some version of the same truth. She did it because no one had made her pay before. One evening, almost 2 years after the wedding, Daniel asked the question he had been circling for months. If she had apologized immediately, he said, truly apologized, not tried to minimize it, not defended herself, would it have changed anything? Serena thought about it longer than he expected. "Maybe the business piece," she said, "not the access." He nodded slowly. "That makes sense." "No," Serena said gently. "It probably doesn't. Not if you grew up believing family is an automatic pass." Daniel looked at her. She continued, An apology can change what happens next. It cannot erase what it reveals. That was the real lesson, the one people tend to avoid because it is uncomfortable. We like redemption stories because they return the world to balance. We like to believe that if someone says sorry with enough feeling, the wound becomes a misunderstanding and the future opens back up. But some actions are not just mistakes. They are declarations. Windows into how a person has always seen you when they thought it would cost nothing to show it. Eleanor cutting Serena's hair was not a lapse in judgment. It was judgment, finally made visible. And Serena, for all her grace, had never confused elegance with amnesia. Years later, people who had attended the wedding still told versions of the story at dinners and fundraisers and company offsites where the edges had blurred but the image remained. Some remembered the bride walking down the aisle with one side of her hair cut short and her chin lifted just a little higher than usual. Some remembered the father standing up at the reception and changing the whole room with 6 calm sentences. Some remembered how the groom never quite stood beside his mother the same way again. The ones who understood power remembered something else. They remembered that Serena never raised her voice, never made a scene, never demanded sympathy. She simply refused to hide the truth, and then she let consequence do its work. That was what made the story travel. Not just the cruelty, not even the revenge, if you wanted to call it that. It was the discipline, the restraint, the refusal to collapse on cue for the comfort of the people watching. Because there is a kind of woman the world expects to break beautifully in public and then forgive quickly in private. Serena was not that woman. She was the kind who took a wound, looked directly at the hand that caused it, and decided the real answer would arrive later, cleaner, and cost far more. And maybe that is why the image lasted.
A bride in white, walking toward an altar, with damaged hair she refused to disguise. A groom realizing, in real time, what kind of family he had come from, and what kind of woman he had chosen. A mother smiling through the ceremony because she still believed appearances could save her. A father in the 3rd row, already scheduling a call. By the time the music ended and the flowers wilted and the photographs were framed, the real wedding gift had already been delivered. Clarity. Serena knew exactly who loved her. Daniel knew exactly what loyalty required. Gerald knew exactly where to place pressure. And Eleanor, perhaps for the first time in her life, learned that wealth can buy insulation, influence can buy silence, and status can buy time. But none of them can save you once the person you underestimated decides to stop protecting you from yourself. So if you ever find yourself wondering whether patience is weakness, remember Serena in that bridal suite. Remember the scissors. Remember the silence. Remember the walk down the aisle. Remember the toast. Remember the contract notice. Remember the meetings she never accepted. Remember the note she filed away without reply. Remember the company that shifted, the board that recalculated, the son who finally saw clearly, and the woman who never once needed to scream in order to be heard. Because some people win by dominating the room, and some people win by letting the room witness exactly what was done to them, then building the consequence so carefully that by the time it arrives, nobody can call it revenge. Only justice.